Hi, Alex, and hi, John. Welcome. Hi, welcome, Grace.
Hey, thank you. I'm listening in for Green Mountain Power.
Excuse me?
Oh, I was just saying I'm listening in for Green Mountain Power.
Great, thank you. Hi, Shrini.
Hi, Shira. How are you?
Doing well, how are you? Welcome, Matt. Welcome, Dylan. We'll just give a little bit more time. I know a few more people are coming in. Welcome, Mia and Dominic. And welcome, Ben. We're just waiting on a couple more people. I know that Pike is trying to come in, and I know that we're waiting for Jeff as well. And we have Matt. Great. Okay. And I think we can go ahead and get started. Pike will be joining us as well. I know he was having a little trouble with the link. Um, but for today's subgroup meeting, we have allotted 90 minutes. So we will be going until around 3:30, more or less, if, or we're able to fill in the time as need be. I do want to remind everyone about public comment. So we have allocated 10 minutes at the end for public comment, but we'll also be pausing throughout the time to be able to get to public comment. If there are any members of the public who would like to comment, the one ask is that you limit those comments to 2 minutes so that we have enough time to get through as many people if we have multiple people who want to comment. And then if there's additional time after those 2 minutes and nobody else wants to speak, we're happy to circle back to you if you need more time. Um, and with that, I believe, Ben, you proposed a couple of starting places for us. Thank you so much for that. So Ben was asking that we revisit some of the topics that Matt Coda proposed at the last EAG meeting. Um, and so, yes, so we have that. And then also speaking about the merits of the weatherization, the WAP program. Um, And so those are the two main things. If there's anything else that any of the subgroup members would like to cover, um, any things that they would like to get out of this meeting, feel free to propose them now so that we have a little bit of a roadmap for today's meeting. Mia.
Yeah, just to agenda set as a reminder for this group. The PUC has asked for feedback about credit ownership straw proposals, by May 18th, or sorry, 17th. We have already submitted some feedback. We had, based on the feedback of this group, had produced a second memo that we have not yet submitted, and we're trying to get consensus on within this group whether to recommend moving forward with that memo with the full EAG. So I think just, figuring out what action items we can take away from this in the form of written feedback to produce on behalf of the full EAG. And I'll add that, I don't know if we'll have time for it, but this group has had some good discussions about delivered fuels, and I don't think we've really gotten anywhere that's actionable, but that might be something we could revisit if there's enough time after we've covered the items that Ben mentioned. Thanks.
Thanks, Mia. Anyone else? Okay. Then I'd love to hand it over to Ben. Ben, if you'd like to speak a little bit more to what more you wanted to hear. And then we can move from there.
I think I was just making the point that I think at the full EAG meeting when we met last time, we didn't, the meeting kind of ended and we didn't have time to really discuss delivered fuels. So if you recall, I took some time to talk about, we were talking all about installed measures, and I was talking about the weatherization assistance program and, programs that like that cover 100% of cost. So in my mind, we haven't really had a chance to delve into some of the points that Matt raised. So I was just bringing that up to I wanted to, I used up time at the last full meeting, so I wanted to give time to, talk about some of the other stuff that we needed to talk about. So, and I don't know if Jeff Wilcox is on, but I know that he, had some stuff to say as well. So I didn't want to take up too much time just, reiterating the same points that I made last time. So.
Thanks, Ben. And so I think that's a handover to you, Matt.
Yeah. So you want to talk about delivered fuels, or do you want to talk about the memo?
I think both. I mean, we in I don't think we've really talked or really gotten into the meat of the discussion on delivered fuels yet. We've been talking a lot about installed stuff, and then I think the memo kind of got into kind of that same realm, broader issues there. So, I think we need to discuss both. So,
all right. Well, from a delivered fuels perspective, I understand the sentiment that was expressed earlier by Pike and others about consent, and I agree that disclosure. I think consent is part of disclosure, and I think disclosure is lacking as a legal statute in Vermont. But that's something that can be remedied with a recommendation. Consumers deserve to know what they're getting. I've always been in favor of that. And we've had several solutions that we have tried but have not become law. Um, Fuel companies, whether it's the wholesale supplier or the retailer, are making a significant capital investment providing that renewable fuel to their customers. And the arrangement of what that cost should be is a private contract between the dealer. So Delivered Fuels is the entity that makes the capital investment in order to get the renewable fuel to Vermont. Regards to heating contractors that are installing clean heat equipment, they have a methodology right now in order to equipment may qualify for a clean heat measure and to assign the credit value so there's not a dispute at a later date between the consumer and the contractor. It includes in our form has all the stipulations which the December order by the PUC required.
And Matt, you were breaking up the very last part, I think. I know I missed. I'm not sure if everyone else missed. Do you mind just repeating the last sentence of what you said?
Yes. So just to clarify, the early action credits, which can be achieved since January 1, 2023, we needed some methodology in order to mint those credits, even if it was all speculative. So we created a form and we ran it by the Public Utility, the Heating Cooling Contractors of Vermont created a form, ran it by the Public Utility Commission, which offered feedback on what else should be included in the form. We revised the form at the advice of legal counsel and are now distributing that form, which is wide use amongst the hundreds of heating contractors throughout Vermont while installing clean heat measures.
Go ahead, Mia.
Yeah, I mean, I think my main thing with the form, and this isn't to say that anyone, should have done differently during this interim period. I just don't think the consumer, if you're asking someone to sign over our credits, I've looked at the form and it doesn't really say like what a clean heat credit is or indicate even that it could have some potential value that the consumer is being asked to sign over. Like I just don't think, that it fulfills what this group has sort of outlined as important about, making sure the customer understands what they're agreeing to. And again, I don't think it's anyone's fault that this is hard to do at this period. I worry that, if we're concerned about equity, just, assuming that these transactions are a done deal and everything's been done correctly, I don't feel like that's been achieved during this early action period.
Thanks. Srini?
Yeah, I think I looked at the form. I think the form does a good job of capturing the basic information. And I had two questions. One is what actually happens prior to the customer actually looking at this form. So my comment is more around what Mia just said. What type of education, what type of orientation has happened around clean heat credit to begin with, so that the customer is well informed, well educated about what they're actually filling out and signing up for. So that's number one. The second, I didn't quite capture your comments, Matt, earlier because your voice was breaking up. You said something about this form is being developed with advice with legal counsel and being reviewed by PUC. So is this a work in progress, or is this something that has been already introduced into the marketplace where customers are actually looking at it, or what's the status of that?
Looks like Matt needs a little moment, maybe getting somewhere quieter.
Sorry about that.
No
I
worries.
realize that.
Well, I'll add in the interim, the PUC's order that, Matt shared, it does nod to the fact that it's not clear that homeowners do own those, or property owners do own those credits right now. They could, and it seems like that's what the straw proposal envisions, and what we've agreed with previously. But like, it's possible that the PUC could come up with something completely different that would invalidate those transactions. So I think we're definitely in the realm of, this is pretty speculative, and these people who, the contractors who are using this form, are sort of betting on it to happen in a certain way. So I don't think any of this is final until the PUC makes the final rules, just to context.
Hi, this is Matt. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Mia. And to add another layer to it, remember, what we're designing here could all disappear in January. The new legislature that's elected on November 5th could look at the rule that's designed by the PUC and determine that this was entirely waste time. This doesn't go into effect until a majority in the House and the Senate pass it, and the governor either signs it or supermajority overrides the next governor's veto. So this is entirely speculative, not only from the process of, will this form be adopted by the PUC? We received legal advice, created the form, PUC reviewed it, asked for a few changes, but didn't offer us any guarantees that it could be used as credits. So Mia's absolutely right. Furthermore, any company that uses this, or any other form of their own choosing, at their own design, by their own legal counsel, it may be worthless. They may have expended all this labor to get these forms signed with no financial benefit.
Thanks, Matt. Pike, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just had a question for Matt, and I was wondering if he's received or heard any feedback about the use of the form thus far. You know, has it been onerous for fuel dealers or for customers?
I have received no feedback that has indicated it's onerous.
So far it's pretty simple to use.
Yeah, and these types of forms are, whether it's getting a credit for, or getting a discount or rebate for installing a more energy efficient heating oil appliance, or getting a rebate on a new oil tank. They're both dealers, contractors, and consumers, particularly in the heating oil world, are very accustomed to using these forms.
Thanks.
So any other questions or thoughts on that end? And we'll open up to the public soon. Okay, Shunia, it looked like you were gonna unmute, but I maybe not. Okay, so then
yeah, just for procedurally to make this happen. So right now the memo says, we, the EAG, assuming the whole group approves this memo, think that, the rules about disclosure that we proposed during the normal period of the clean heat standard should apply for the clean heat standard. So all the disclosure stuff we recommended should apply here, and there shouldn't be a separate set of rules for installed measures. Matt has proposed removing that for the reasons he said. So just for a point of, how we get, a work product produced, we're going to have to decide amongst ourselves and amongst the full EAG whether that sort of paragraph in essence stays or in or now. And then, if it's removed, that means we don't have any comment on the sort of early action period, essentially, unless we come up with something else. So I just like to encourage this group to think, ahead towards what we should be recommending be done. Thanks.
Yeah, and does anyone have any thoughts based on that of moving on to the final work product? Is this something that we should remove? How do you feel about it? And as Mia said, Matt in previous emails has said that he cannot approve the second memo as it's written without that piece removed. So I looked to the other members of the EAG, so Ben or Srini, for in and Pike for input, or Matt for any clarification. Pike?
Could you put the language up on the board?
Yes, give me a second. And so you're asking for the language of the second memo?
Yeah.
I can put the relevant section in. Ashir, maybe you could like share the file, but I'll put the text in. I have a Word document that, yeah.
Okay, and I can allow screen sharing as well. It's helpful. Srini.
Yeah, I was just thinking from more from a practical perspective. If this form is, let's say, being used by equipment providers and fuel vendors to get information uh, as much as possible until something is concrete is in place. How does as a customer, how does the customer engage and provide household income information? In what context? In what context would they provide household information? I'm not really sure how that engagement will happen. If they don't have the context of clean heat credit and the fact that low income and middle income families are going to have ownership of clean heat credits, why would I disclose my household income at this initial conversation of when I'm buying a heat pump, or whether, I'm just asking a hypothetical question here. How does that engagement happen? I call up somebody, a heat pump vendor shows up, he comes with this form, and I don't have any knowledge about clean heat credit. And the vendor is asking me household income information. Why would I disclose the household income information?
I'm happy to answer that. So whether or not you're low income, moderate income, or the richest person on South Burlington, the credit, if it's an installed device, starts with the homeowner, and then it's assigned to either the person, in my view, it's either assigned to the person that does the work, the wholesaler who then purchases the wholesaler of that equipment, or the individual or people that have the rebates. Now, in many cases, that could be all three. The efficiency utility, the wholesale equipment supplier, and the contractor could be providing incentives to a consumer in order to encourage them to install a heat pump, for instance. In which case, the difficult challenge will be determining what share of the pie of the credit is owned by each entity. In terms of disclosing the information, that's done by self-attestation, which is what's done whenever you get a rebate on an electric car. No W-2s, no income taxes required. It's just sign here. Yes, I make less than that. But your question, which is currently, what's the incentive structure for someone to tick that box and say that they make less? Well, if there were a rebate on top of that, then there it would be. We have no idea what incentives or rebates contractors are supplying low-income Vermonters to encourage them to sign that box.
Yeah.
That's a private contract. I could give you $1 off. I could give you nothing off. I could give you $5,000 off. That's a private agreement in competitive industries.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the explanation, Matt. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how this form will be used until a material value is assigned to the, clean heat credit, and the customers are aware of the information that they actually own the credit. I'm just talking about in the interim period, how is this form actually used, and what does the engagement look like? That's what I'm trying to. I think that was kind of the question that Pike asked earlier about what kind of reaction are you getting from the fuel vendors and the customers. So I'm just being more specific about it.
Yeah, that would vary from vendor to vendor. How they their success in getting someone to sign to check that box, the methodology that they employ, whether it's an incentive or some other um, um, way that they can encourage them to sign it, and certainly it's the customer's right to not sign it. They don't have to.
Does that
But
answer your
remember,
question?
unlike a utility, you're dealing with hundreds of companies and thousands of individuals that are all doing different, disparate things in a marketplace that where a credit could be worth $1, it could be worth many times more than that. But we don't know what the value of that credit is. So a customer might say, "I think this is worth something. I'm not going to sign it, or I'm not going to sign it unless you promise me X, Y, and Z. Take 10% off this or that." Or the customer might just say, "Yeah, I know you're up against it. I'm going to sign that over to you because you've always been a good supplier of energy services."
Yeah. I guess my reaction to this is this type of engagement this early in the process would probably could benefit from some guidelines or guardrails. So I'm not even really sure whether this type of engagement is necessary now. If the intent is to document early credits, uh, you know, that will get accounted properly once this clean heat standard is in place and the appropriate guidelines are in place. I can see how, from an accounting perspective, this exercise could be useful, but to assign whatever value the vendor chooses and have an engagement without any guidelines or guardrails, I'm not really sure whether that's an objective process.
Well, keep in mind that even if now there's a big if, if we were betting here on the horse tracks, I would say that this law will never come to pass. I mean, we'll never have a clean heat standard. And this is just theoretical exercise done by people that care about policy. But if it does come to pass, even if it does, there is no set value for assigning credit. I, the consumer, want the company to come and install a heat pump. They uh, they will install it and they want to obtain the credit so they can sell it upstream. But they won't know what the value of the credit is. That's will be determined by the credit marketplace. It could be 10 cents, it could be $10. They don't know at the time that they do the installation, even if this were to become law. So the idea that we're going to have a set value, it's going to be $100. That's going to be the credit for everyone across the board for the thousands of people that are installing. That's not going to happen, not now, and not if this becomes law.
And Mia, I see your hand. Srini, I wanted to touch base with you on you mentioned creating guidelines or guardrails prior to engaging. So prior to companies engaging with uh, you know, credit owners. Um, is this something that you'd like to also incorporate into the memo, or is this just a thought that
No, I'm just trying to figure out what is exactly going to happen in trying to account for these early action credits and what is the customer actually signing away. That's what I'm trying to figure out. If the intent is for accounting purposes, to say, look, we've engaged these customers starting from this date and have installed the heat pump, and we think that the clean heat credit, once it is finalized, monetized with the dollar value, belongs to this customer. That's why we are keeping track of all this information so that the customer can appropriately get credited. If that is the intent, I agree with this exercise. But if during the process there is actually a contract negotiation going on by the vendor offering something for the clean heat credit, the customer is signing away permanently, I'm not sure about that.
Well,
So,
let me keep in mind, Srini, that they already are, and it's not going to the guy in the van and the boots and the blue collar guy that's doing the work. It's going to Efficiency Vermont. So right now, and this was the testimony, not the testimony, the what was said in the tag by a representative from Efficiency Vermont. Right now, if you install a heat pump, you'll notice that on your bill by the heat pump installer company, there's a $350 or $450 discount. That's an upstream discount, which they achieve through their supplier, their wholesale supplier, like your FW Web or your Granite Group. That entity received a payment from Efficiency Vermont for the buy down of that product because that's their upstream discount in compliance with Tier 3. So the end result is, and this is what Dave Weston of Efficiency Vermont said very clearly on tape, Efficiency Vermont owns the environmental attributes of that equipment because they discounted it upstream. And they have the record of who installed it because as a contractor, we have to supply the name and address of the individual that received the benefit. So this is not a battle between the customer and the person that did the work. This is between the person that did the work and Efficiency Vermont. Because the contractor who uses this form will claim, should this become law, and that's a big if, that they own the credit because they got the customer to sign this form. Efficiency Vermont, if this becomes law, and that's a big if, will claim that no, they own the credit because they bought down the cost of that heat pump upstream at the wholesale supplier. The wholesale supplier might step in and say, yes, but I gave a rebate to my contractor for this. I own the credit. And the PUC will have to adjudicate who owns what.
Yeah.
And the only way that the working stiff, the blue collar guy that's installing this can have any skin in this game is if they claim it now. And they are claiming it.
Yeah. So it sounds like, excuse my language here, it sounds mind-boggling to me to imagine Efficiency Vermont being in the way or being a barrier or impediment to this process when we are talking about whether the clean heat credit should belong to the customer or it should belong to the delivering party, which is the vendor. That has been the spirit of the conversation in all these meetings. And I just find it a bit, I don't know, confusing.
Well, who owns the
Imagine
environmental attributes right now? The environmental attributes are owned by Efficiency Vermont.
Yeah.
This is not in dispute. This is what they said out loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the contractors are trying to take a little bit of that because they think they deserve some for doing the work. In the PUC, if this becomes law, again, a big if, we'll have to adjudicate that.
I want to make sure that, that we also give Mia a chance. She's been waiting patiently with her hand up. And then also just a chance for public comment as well. I know Jay looks like he may have dropped, but he did have a comment as well. Go ahead, Mia.
Right, and on that note, I think Jay has left, but no one should be using the chat for anything except purely administrative or if they're having technical problems with speaking to us, in which case we'll have to say, go ahead and use the chat. So just a reminder to everybody not to use the chat for additional comments. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the opportunity for us, the EAG, to weigh in on what we think the PUC should do. No matter what people are claiming or asking property owners to do or sign away, it's up to the PUC in the end to sort of make the rules for everybody and how this will operate in the system. I continue to think because there's this huge amount of uncertainty that it's better for us to say something rather than not say something about how this should be done in the early action period, because it's clear that there's big questions here. And I think the more context we can give to the PUC about some of these issues would be, I think helpful for them so they understand where we're coming from. But I think just sort of striking this issue and not mentioning it at all in our final memo doesn't really give voice to these issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Mia. I want to take a pause just to open up to any public comment. And I also do want to make sure that so one of the main reasons that we're not using the chat is so that we can make sure that everything is on public record. So I will go ahead and read out Jay's his comment in the chat. So Jay Kelly said, "Who's going to police that? All federal incentives are against your income taxes. And with that, I'd like to open to any other public comment. And feel free to raise your hand. Okay, hearing none, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to the members of our subgroup.
So on that point that a member from the public has put in the chat, from my understanding, Inflation Reductions Act has given a new set of incentives for all these greenhouse gas emission related initiatives, and that can be claimed through your federal income tax filing. So it's a completely different mechanism that is already in place, apart from what Efficiency Vermont used to do for all these years. And I'm not even really sure what Efficiencies Vermont role is in a customer claiming the federal incentives. So I just want to point out that whatever is the legacy practice of Efficiency Vermont, something else has been introduced where the customer can avail these benefits directly through the income tax filing, okay, through the rebates or the credits available from the Inflation Reduction Act. Having said that, I just think that, you know, I go back to Mia's comments, irrespective of what the legacy practice is, in the spirit of the clean heat credit discussion, I think we should just focus on continue to focus on for install heat measures, all the credit should belong to the customer. And that's what empowers them, and that's what gives them the negotiating power to actually move forward with the greenhouse gas emission reduction. So I think we should stay with that position. I don't think that position should be compromised, irrespective of what other agencies are doing.
So just to be clear, we're discussing right now on our memo whether or not we're trying to determine whether or not there should be more information on the form that the fuel dealers are using now related to the value of these credits, which is still unknown. That's the question that's on the table. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'd say that doesn't fully characterize it. In a previous memo, we said, you know, you should provide all this information to customers to inform their decisions. And this basically says you should still have to do that during the early action period. So it's building off the first memo, which we already filed with the PUC, which is a little nitpicky, but just want to be clear that was my understanding of our position from the last meeting.
Yeah.
And to not be nitpicky, but this is really the heating contractors. The fuel dealers are using it for, some may be using it for biodiesel, but it's largely for installed measures being conducted by plumbing and heating contractors.
Thanks, Matt. I'll make sure the language in the memo is that, but yeah, it's meant to be for installed measures, so people installing measures. Thanks.
So yeah, it's an interesting position because, you know, as Matt has stated, we don't know the value of what the credits will be in the future. But I think just from an equity perspective, it's a good idea for folks to be aware of what they potentially could be holding on to. And we do know that all the measures installed as we speak, you know, from January 1, 2023 up until the start of the Clean Heat Standard compliance period, which would likely be January 1 of 26. All that activity is going to be creditable. So what this raises for me is that there's a whole bunch of market activity that is happening that we, you know, is not being captured by this form, or there's a whole bunch of market activity, you know, heat pump installs that have occurred that, you know, are currently unaccounted for, you know, a customer, like, so there's all this what is happening now, what happened, a year ago, before, like back in 2023, before any such form was created, before the rulemaking process for the clean heat standard started, what we're saying, would be effectively, we'd say, okay, move forward from this day forward would apply to these credits. But, there's a whole bunch of credits out there that are not going to be captured under what we are suggesting. So does it make sense to, require, such disclosure about a potential value of clean heat standard credit for, only a fraction of these early action credits created? Does that make sense? Yeah. That looks like you got your hand up.
I just want to double down on my earlier comment. Almost every heat pump that has been installed since January 1 of 2023, I can't say everyone, but nearly everyone, has had an upstream rebate provided by Efficiency Vermont. The chief regulatory person at Efficiency Vermont has stated unequivocally that they own all environmental attributes for the heat pumps that have been discounted, rebated, that have been installed by our contractors in Vermont homes. So the question isn't whether the smattering of this form has been used, because that will be adjudicated by the PUC. I think the bigger question is are heat pumps that have been installed since January 1, 2023 that have received an upstream rebate from Efficiency Vermont under the Efficiency Modernization Act or the Tier 3 program, whether or not those clean heat credits are owned by Efficiency Vermont or owned by the customer. That is the elephant in the room. Whether or not a contractor gets 10 cents on a dollar for having someone fill out this form is a little bit of an abstraction here.
Great. I see Mia's hand and Pike's hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be something that's hard for the PUC to ultimately sort of weigh in this discussion, but I think it doesn't really make a difference in terms of our advice based on what I'm understanding we valued. The customer owns it either way, unless those interactions are properly informed, they shouldn't count. So I don't think that it matters whether we're talking about Efficiency Vermont or a heat pump installer. I think basically the homeowner should own those, the property owner should own those credits and be reasonably informed. And I don't think that's happening in any context across the board, just because I don't think that's really possible right now. And, in the memo I spoke to, that's a huge logistical challenge that the PUC is going to have to untangle later on. But I don't think it matters who's claiming to own the credits besides the property owner at this point. That's my personal take on this.
I'm sorry, but that's a really important point, Mia, that I just want to follow up on, which is that means that those credits, which may be disputed by a handful of them, might be disputed by heating contractors at a later date, should this become law. If the EAG is recommending that the PUC say to Efficiency Vermont that even though you provide an upstream rebate for a different program, you don't own those credits, the homeowner does. If the EAG would make that position, make that statement, I mean, that has implications that I'd have to sort through. That's not what we have said today.
I think that's what we did say in our first memo. We said property owner owns those credits, pure stop. Didn't speak to the early action period. That's just what we said in the clean heat standard going forward. And I think we had said in a previous meeting that we felt it was not equitable to go to some completely different standard for the early action period. That's my understanding of where we last left this. I agree, it creates real complications, but I don't think if we're saying that there's important equity issues in making sure that the credits reside with property owners and saying, but actually that doesn't matter for the early action period, I think that's different. Again, I don't know exactly how the PUC threads that needle. I just think it's nonsensical to assume different equity standards in different phases of the clean heat standard. That's my take.
And so I'm hearing some different some splitting opinions, some commonalities. And so I one of the things as someone who's not an expert in credit, I'm looking to you um to start thinking through some options um of action items. And so, Pike, I do still see your hand up, but I also just want to think through because it sounds like there is there are some points that we're agreeing on, like the fact that the homeowner should be informed about what they're agreeing to. But then there are places where we are dividing. And so I'm wondering if like options for next step, if it makes sense to have um pieces that we flag that the EAG is on agreement on, and then pieces um additional things to consider, which might be individual recommendations or, um, things that are supported by XYZ amount of people. And then there may be, or we could continue to hash it out here and try to find a, um, a place where we have 100% consensus. Or there's also the option of just completely striking it out, which seems like some people are would not like to have that piece completely taken out. So I want you to begin thinking through some of those options for next steps as we continue to discuss. And Pike, I do see your hand. Jay, I also see your hand. Welcome for coming back. We did have a public comment period while you were out, but we'll make sure that we open another one up so that we can further discuss your point. So I'll hand it over to Pike.
So perhaps we should include or could include language that says, regardless or irrespective of um, any any potential transfer that's occurred prior to our comments, that we still agree or still wish that the credits begin. The credit ownership begins at the household or the homeowner. I think if we state that, I'm not sure why it matters what Efficiency Vermont has to say about it. If the rules say otherwise, the rules say otherwise. But maybe we need language that says that we recognize that there are agreements out there between heat pump distributors and Efficiency Vermont, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't think that those should be valid.
Any thoughts from the EAG on that, Ben?
Yeah. So with regards to the Efficiency Vermont deal, so they, I believe the attributes that Matt is referring to, so those are all tier 3 attributes. So again, going back to January 1 of 23, and we're talking about early action credits here, Efficiency Vermont's going to be able to basically take all the attributes that they've accrued, for their tier 3, and they have those attributes and can then pass those along. So it's just, yeah, it's an odd period of time because the clean heat standard wasn't even enacted at the time that some of these credits were created. I mean, I think all we need to do as an equity advisory group here is just suggest that it's similar to the once the clean heat standard is enacted, that the credits will lie with the homeowner or the property owner. I don't know as though we need to go much beyond that at this point, because obviously there's multiple things going on. Tier 3's doing its thing, and then clean heat standard early action period is also overlapping on top of that. We know from the statute that tier 3 and clean heat credits are both, you can get credit for both of those for an installed measure. And we know that all credits created during the early action period will also be creditable. So from where we sit, I think all we need to do is just suggest that there shouldn't be a different rules for the early action period, right? I mean, in our memo, we can just say homeowners own the credit, and then let it lie there. So, I mean, am I missing something, or is that's pretty much what, from our perspective, that's what we're debating, right?
Yeah. Matt?
I think that's right. Excuse me. I think that's right. But if you're going to put that in there, I think we have to acknowledge what is going to be the fundamental issue. I mean, not to represent Efficiency Vermont's side is, but they would make the argument that says we have records of everyone that installed the heat pump from January 1 to 2023 till now. We can sell those to the obligated parties and use that cash to provide additional rebates to consumers. That would be my argument if I work for them. But the consumers don't get the benefit of it. So if we say the consumers own the credits, early action credits, even if they received the benefit, but benefit from a different program, but because they weren't aware that they were receiving a benefit that might apply to a program that has not yet been approved by the legislature, then no, they own it. And then it will be the work of aggregators to collect those credits from the consumers in order to. So if I was Efficiency Vermont and the EAG made this recommendation that they don't own the credit, that in fact the consumer owns it, and this law comes to pass, then it'll be a scramble between Efficiency Vermont or whatever entity and the installers to claim that credit afterwards. So we're either creating two systems. One is you give them all to Efficiency Vermont or to the contractors that get this paperwork signed. Or you're saying, nope, consumers own all of it. And when in fact if this does pass, this becomes law and those credits have value, and then we get an aggregation where consumers will be solicited to sell their credits. Because obligated parties are going to need them if this becomes law, and they're going to want to get them before the Efficiency Vermont does.
Any thoughts? Yeah, Mia?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that, people shouldn't be getting a value for nothing. Like, if these credits have a value, ideally, they should be passing on some of that value onto the homeowner. It's not about anyone, being, I guess, unfair in a certain way. It's just that the idea, I think, for me is that, there will be some monetary value for the credits. Certainly no one's passing on any monetary value to customers or other services right now. They couldn't, that would be impossible because they don't know what the value is going to be. But I just think the idea is that, if it passes that you could have been doing all the things you were doing during this interim early action period, and then you get this sort of extra bonus on top, that just doesn't seem equitable to me. I think there should be some sort of incentive to provide something of value to a property owner in exchange for their credits. I think it's a really difficult situation that everyone's in. And I think most parties are just acting as best they can, but I think it goes down to those equity issues and what creates the most equitable outcomes for low and moderate income households. So I don't want our feedback to be targeted in terms of who's claiming which things right now. I'd like our group, I prefer our group to stay out of that, but I do think we can say we think there's an important equity issue here, and it doesn't just have a different standard during the early action period.
Thanks, Mia. Matt?
Just to state the other part of the equation, which is part of our equity should be what is the cost of this program? And the cost of this program is the cost of the credits, because the higher the cost of the credits, the higher the cost for heating oil, and propane, and kerosene, particularly kerosene, which is predominantly used by low-income Vermonters. And if we make it more difficult to aggregate, I know I'm arguing against my position, but if we're making it more difficult to aggregate,
then the cost of the credits in any competitive marketplace goes up, and thereby the cost to heat low-income Vermonters' homes goes up for those that have not been able or can't switch to a different heating source that's non-fossil based. That's got to be part of our consideration.
And Matt, just following up on the end of Mia's point, and forgive me if I'm not following. Mia suggested uh Mia, if you would recap the language that you suggested. I just wanted to know, Matt, if you agreed with that or if the second point that you made was an additional point to that and like a separate piece, or if you agreed with the language that Mia had set forward.
Yeah, I'm just trying to reconstruct the thread of that, but yeah, I mean, I think essentially what I was saying was that there shouldn't be a separate standard of what's equitable during the early action period and during the sort of regular clean heat standard period. So if we feel strongly about it in one phase of it, it shouldn't matter for the earlier phase. I think I tried to speak to this in the draft memo that I created, but I don't know that you know, maybe there's proposed language that this group could create that would help get us to a place we all feel comfortable with.
And Ben, I see your hand, but I did just want to follow up with Matt on that point. Yeah, so
Yeah, I
I was
think
just
that,
a little confused if the second piece that you were bringing in was um just an additional piece, or if you like agree with what Mia had put forward.
I don't know what the best process is, but we all come from different perspectives, and that's great. And I think we're having a good conversation and a healthy conversation about a really important idea and how to make sure it's equitable. But be quite honest with you, what I have in my mind, it might be different from what you all have in your minds. And so while it sounds correct, I really need, especially if I'm going to put my name and vote on it, I would need to see it on paper before moving forward.
Matt, I'd encourage you, for the sake of expediency, to propose language that you'd like to see in a memo that you feel like everyone can get behind. It's kind of hard to get the will of the group into something that everyone feels good about. So I think that would help if we could work that into the memo, something
Yeah,
specific.
the only suggestion I had was to remove those two paragraphs, but I'm happy to if you think there's something else that needs to be added.
Well, just
I'm happy
along this
to.
thing about equity among the different phases, I thought that the language had gotten to that. If it doesn't, I think if there's a way that you could phrase it that you think speaks to the themes we've been discussing, but doesn't, it's going to be hard to know which language is the problematic part.
So you're speaking to regarding early action versus if this program becomes law, what happens with the credits afterwards? Is that what you're talking about? Two phases?
Yeah, correct. So in the first memo, we already talked about ownership. I feel like the EAG voted on it. That's pretty settled, although you can certainly submit your own comments. The part we're talking about is whether what we said in memo 1 should be applied to the early action period.
When you say memo 1,
we voted on a memo. I can put it in the chat.
Okay,
Link to
I
it.
see.
Voted
Memo
on
2.
a full memo for the EAG. Right. This was the memo thing is confusing because we thought we were scrambling for a PUC deadline that ended up getting moved out. So we tried to return for more detailed feedback on credit ownership issues. That's why it's a little confusing.
Okay, Matt, did you have a response to that?
No, I'm reading it. I'm rereading it again now and make sure that my earlier objections still stand against that paragraph and figuring out if I can come up with clarifying language.
Okay, no worries. Thanks. So while you do that, and we'll return back to you. I saw Ben, you had your hand up. Thank you for waiting patiently.
No worries. In light of what Matt just said, it just occurred to me, talking about this early action period. I understand the sentiment that, saying having two different considerations for both the early action and the, once the clean heat standard is in place, two different periods might be inequitable if you did both those, if you had two different systems. But if we just kind of didn't comment on the early action period and let it lie, as it were, and didn't explicitly say that homeowners get the credits for the early action period, would that essentially spur basically more credit transfer to the obligated parties, giving them sort of like out of the gate a pool of credits to work with, which would thereby allow them to meet their obligations in the earlier years kind of more expediently, but also all the while keeping rate pressures down on consumers. So would that help keep, the cost of the program is tied to the cost of, what it's going to cost for monitors, what it's going to cost for fuel, for, let's think about the low income community. If we can keep the cost of fuel as low as possible, that's going to be the most equitable thing we can do for low income Vermonters. So if we just don't say anything about the early action period and allow those credits to be transferred as they are now to the fuel dealers, then they won't have to pass costs on to their customers as early on in the process as maybe they would if there's all this aggregation going on and scrambling for credits, bidding for credits, etc. So just a thought and thinking about, it's good to remind ourselves that the most equitable thing we can do is keep fuel costs and, low for Vermonters generally, but also for, the LMI community. Just throwing it out there, as an option.
Thanks, Ben. Mia?
I think it's an interesting point and one I hadn't considered. Having more readily available credits is a good thing. I think the market is so complicated. I don't know that there's a straight line. I mean, right now, the obligated entities by and large won't have those credits. I mean, some of them might be doing that with, delivered fuels and stuff like that. But the people who are in the most position to raise fuel costs probably wouldn't be in a position to have the credits, depending on how this was done. I mean, I think most of the credits sort of under this proposal of, different rules for early action would be in the hands of either Efficiency Vermont, the EUs, or random installers. So there's still going to be a lot of trading. So I think it's an interesting point. It is a good point that you and Matt have brought up, that like adding more complexity raises costs, which makes the whole thing more expensive. I think that's true. I just think we should be more confident there's a straight line between people who have credits now and the obligated entities who are going to try to buy them.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut the line, but Mia's point is valid, but it is so different across the spectrum. A propane wholesaler in Montpelier, Vermont, a very large one, you can see their tanks, does not have any way to create their own credits. A heating oil wholesale distributor in Burlington, Vermont has a way. A heating fuel provider that has installing heat pumps is already earning them and is storing them in their filing cabinet. A propane provider that has no service work is not. So it really depends on the type of company, where they're situated, and the type of fuel. And no one's trading it right now, because I would say a great percentage of those that would be obligated don't believe this will ever come to pass. They really don't. I talk to them every day. They don't see how this could possibly be enforced. And we can see it in the registry, where we've got, 3 out of every 4 dealers actually registered. So there's real skepticism that what we're working on will ever amount to anything, quite frankly. But there's no trading happening right now.
Thank you, Matt. Go to Pike. Also, Matt, when you are able to get the language, I just want to touch base on that, the language that you'd like to see in the memo. Please let us know or put it in the in the chat, and I can read it out loud. And yeah, so with that, I'll go over to Pike.
Yeah, I also wanted to reiterate Mia's comment that complexity adds costs, and I think this last hour we've all spent on this really minutia really demonstrates that there's probably a much better, simpler, more efficient way of getting to the goal of reducing greenhouse gases from the thermal sector. I just wanted to put that out there.
You know,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say this whole thing about early action credits and who's got the credit and who will eventually own it is an accounting issue, an administration issue. Somebody with authority needs to deal with. We can debate all day we want. We are not going to solve this here. So I like the idea of Ben saying, keep the language very generic, and somebody else has got to figure this out. We are not going to solve this problem. This is purely an accounting issue. This is not the first time in the world an act has come as of a specific date and people have been given appropriate credit retroactive. This is not the first time. Several agencies have done this. So let's not try to solve the problem here. As much as we'd like to debate, it's the vendors versus the, other agencies and all that. I really think that it's purely an accounting issue. Somebody with authority should be able to solve this problem, and let's not worry about this much at this point. That's what I would suggest.
And so I'd like to go ahead and take a moment to open it back up to the public, and thank you all for your patience. Thank you, Jay, for your patience. We'll go ahead. Yeah, if you have any comments.
Yeah, so I know, so I work in the automotive vertical, and I know a lot of times people talk about incentives and rebates, and one other person had mentioned something about retailers and stuff like that. So a lot of times you'll hear like an ad, right, around in the fall, a lot of them's come out, and one will say dealer cash up to $10,000. So GM, if you buy a truck, will give up to $10,000 to that dealer. So that dealer, it's up to them whether they want to put that whole $10,000 into the deal, right? So that's one way of doing it. It's called dealer cash. And if you know about it, you can negotiate it within, or incentives, right? You can either get $5,000 off or 0.9% APR, right? They're giving you the option, right? Do you want a lower price or do you want the lower interest rate, right? The same thing, you buy tires, right? Firestone, you buy 4 tires, they'll send you a gift card for $100 after the fact. The problem with this scenario is nobody's fronting the money up front, right? So you want to build this program based on taxes, based on consumption, and then turn around and use those credits for people that don't exist for probably a year, right? So that's what you're going to have to come up with. I mean, it was the same scenario for universal healthcare with Vermont. Like they were going to have to come up with X amount of money first in order to implement it. The same thing with this is if you're incentivizing something, they come from the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. So whether it be Mitsubishi, anybody that's providing those is providing that incentive because they've already built it, right? So now what the state is trying to do is come in and put in a middle layer and saying, hey, we're going to have this incentive, but we're not going to provide any money for it. The money is actually going to be on a sliding scale versus consumption, which is a nightmare because are these credits in perpetuity, right? Or are they based on fossil fuel sales? Because the folks that have the resources that are consuming the majority of the fossil fuels also have the resources to switch to electric right away. So what happens when you see that curve and you see the fossil fuel sales drop, and you also have this pool of people that you want to give a credit to, that those credits no longer exist because they were based on a sales tax, right? A negative sales tax. All of these consumption taxes are based around driving an influence, right? Which means we're going to tax your fossil fuels, so we don't want you to use them. But in order to pay for this program, we want you to keep using them so we can pay for this program for everybody else. So it's the funding mechanism for this thing is flawed from day one, and it's right. I mean, but that's another thing too, is like the credit. Does everybody get a credit? And how long do those credits last, right? And then is it just an equitable thing? Is it an income-based thing? But I just went through this with my parents, right? And the federal rebates and the federal incentives, they're very they could almost, the FTC could almost sue themselves about this because it's an income-based credit, right? So you get credit against your income taxes. And if you don't have any income taxes to pay, then you're paying the full rate for that heat pump, right? You're getting $1,500 off on that heat pump. You're not getting $1,500 off. You're getting $1,500 off against your taxes, right? So this is something, right? Then we talk about all of these things. It's a nightmare, but that's the way the federal government does it because it's the easiest way to keep track of it from an accounting standpoint, right? You come to my house, hey, you're low income. Well, if I'm going to get this heat pump for half off, yes, I'm low income. Great. Prove it. How do you do that? Well, this system, the only way you prove that is if the Vermont Department of Taxes actually manages the whole thing. But then now you're a year and a half in arrears again for all this money. And, you know, this is going to be a nightmare. I appreciate everything that you're saying, and I love what everything is saying, what everyone is doing and trying to do this stuff. But the practical application of this thing outside of the government funding it firsthand and the Department of Taxes managing it, it's fraught with holes. It's going to make the mortgage
Thank you.
debacle in 08 look like
Thank you,
child's
Jay.
play.
Just a reminder of the 2 minutes because we do have
Yeah, that's
another
fine.
person who wants to comment, but we can circle back if that makes sense. Okay. I do know that we have another comment from John McCormick. John, if you'd like to unmute and speak your comment into the room.
Ashira,
Yes.
I'm John McCormick,
Go
and
ahead.
thank you. I will read the question. Has the Equity Advisory Group reached out to the OEO to invite Richard Giddings to join an EAG meeting to describe the service LIHEAP provides to its 26,119 clients?
And thank you so much, John. Dominic, I see your hand as well. Do you have a response or do you have a
I'm sorry.
public?
I'm sorry. I was trying to read it, but it was taken. It was taken off the chat. So what I wanted to say was, Mr. Giddings could also describe the relationship that LIHEAP has to the OEO's Weatherization Assistance Program, and that's really an important matter for the EAG to understand. I'll end my question there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, Mr. I appreciate you coming back and bringing this up again. After your last comment, Jeff Cox of OEO reached out to me to talk about that possibility, and I sent him details on how to bring it in, basically instructing Jeff for when he felt it appropriate to bring in Mr. Giddings to join him and talk about the interactions between those two programs. So the EAG as a whole has not yet. From my perspective, and I would of course be interested in me and Ashira's perspective as well, when Jeff Wilcox, as the person most in the know there, sees the appropriate time to bring it in, he's been encouraged to do so.
I'll add that the EAG has been using these subcommittee sub-working groups as an opportunity to discuss specific topic issues. So this is about credit ownership. You know, I don't think this meeting is necessarily the right place to discuss these larger issues, but you know, we can discuss it now. We are discussing in our next meeting how to break down our final work product. LIHEAP is definitely one of those issues, and I'm expecting that subcommittees or subgroups within the EAG or individuals within the EAG will be tackling those issues. I'm not sure whether we'll have time on the EAG for guest speakers because frankly, our agendas are always overpacked, but I do feel confident that it is on our work plan and it will be discussed in our process. Thanks.
Thank you, Dominic and Mia.
That's not sufficient. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, thank you for your comment. Like I said, you're always welcome to bring this up for a full EAG discussion in the public comment of those meetings. Thanks.
Thank you. And from the subgroup members, does anyone have a response for Jay? I wanted to make sure that his comments didn't go, unheard as well.
Let's say none other than you raise some very important points there, for sure. As it relates to what we're talking about now, I would say for early action credits, I think Srini, it looks like Srini and Matt dropped off, but I was just going to say that I think, Srini was agreeing with me. I think maybe we, in terms of what we've been talking about with early action stuff, I think we maybe just don't comment further on that and maybe strike that language from the memo. Given that this group didn't exist when that early action period began, I don't know if we necessarily would need to comment on the early action period, given the minutia of details that we've raised here.
And I did want to say that Matt also messaged me and he said that he would send the language, his proposed language via email.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I would respond to Ben saying, the PUC staff did ask for feedback. They highlighted this in the straw proposal. They clearly think that there are unresolved issues. We're hearing unresolved issues. I can certainly say that, agree that if this group and the full EAG can't come to an agreement about credit ownership, then we don't have anything to put in the memo. That's fine. But I don't think I think just because it's complicated doesn't mean there's not an equity issue or it's not worth commenting on to the PUC.
Great point. Yeah. I mean, then alternatively, I would suggest that we be consistent across both the early action and, for both periods of time that we're talking about here. If we're going to make a point, might as well be consistent in that case.
Okay. So looking forward into next steps, it looks like there's still some uncertainty about exactly what should be said. And, we have Matt who's going to, and just another reminder not to use the chat function. We do open up for public comment, so there will be another public comment portion at the end. But so yes, it looks like we have some differences in language. So I'm looking to you as how this subgroup would like to move forward in the next action steps for either addressing the EAG at the next EAG meeting or creating a product for the PUC. So we'll have another EAG meeting before the 17th. I'm unsure if well, I'll put it back to you. I don't know if you would like to have another subgroup meeting before the 17th. But yeah, that seems like the big deadline, and I'm still unclear what type of product this subgroup would like to see before then.
I'm interested in seeing what language Matt comes up with. I think that will be good to see. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions about, I think the one of the big things that come to mind for me is that if we suggest that credit ownership should fall to the homeowners in the early action period, what's that going to do for the basically the credit market when the clean heat standard begins? Because then we could create a scenario where we have potentially thousands of credits scattered across multiple thousands of different homeowners throughout the state who don't know what to do with them. And what are they going to do with them? Really, there's at that point they don't know what to do with them, and they need to be in the hands of the obligated parties or folks that where they actually will attain some sort of value and be essentially injected into the marketplace. So if they're not readily available, then to my earlier point, we could see costs of implementation increase. So it's a interesting scenario because I think it makes sense once the clean heat standard is underway. There's like a clear process, there's value associated with those, but in the early action period, it's like it could be a rough start for the credit marketplace in Vermont if people are scrambling to kind of contact that homeowner we installed a heat pump for 3 years ago. We need that credit. It there's folks have brought it up as well. The European carbon trading market, that is the world's largest carbon trading market. That market had trouble when it first started back in the 2000s. The price crashed. And basically we can look to other markets like that where, we want to create a stable marketplace at the outset. So I think ensuring that these credits are basically usable once the clean heat standard starts, then it'll be a smoother kind of lift off, if you will. But that's the big worry I have there, is that how is this feasible? Like, what are homeowners going to do with the credits, these early action credits, when there's no potentially, the marketplace is not yet really established. So that would be the big question I have.
Okay, one thing that we did not get to, and I'm not sure with the time we have left, was the issue of an exception for the WAP programs. We could leave it in the memo as is, assuming this memo has value as a whole. We could leave it to say there was some debate about that. PUC, decide what you want to do with that information. I'm wary of doing this again in the full group because it was a discussion last time. And I think people had questions, but I don't know that there was a clear sort of end point to dealing with those in the meeting. We can certainly bring it up again. We're going to have to cap it at another 20 minutes or something. So I think we should think about what we want to do with that. Leave it uncertain or strike it or make a clear statement one way or the other.
I'm sorry, I do want just point out that Matt did pop back into the meeting and send this to me in a direct message and then pop back out. So I'm sending it to everyone. So, and I'll just read it out loud for the record. So from Matt, my request is that these sentences be removed from the memo. EAG members have heard reports that some contractors have already asked property owners to preemptively release credits when installing clean heat measures. However, there cannot be informed consent transferring ownership of credits during this period, as property owners could not have reasonably understood the potential value of their credits before a CHS framework had been established. It is also unknown whether these property owners were offered any value in exchange for these credits, or whether these projects happened because of the anticipated CHS or would have happened regardless. And then I also, just also for the public record, would like to read Jay Kelly's comment before he left. He said, Ben, it is unfortunate there is no way to keep the price of fuel down for low-income homeowners once the tax is implemented. This program is going to hurt the people it is trying to help the most.
This is a response to that. I don't think there's a tax being proposed on fuel. I think I get what he's saying, but we're not talking about a tax, just to be clear. It would be a cost associated with implementing the program being passed on to the customers, is the way I understand it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of what Matt just put on there, I think would striking that language effectively be what I was referring to as like not commenting on the early action. I think he is taking issue with the way that that's worded. That's my understanding, is the way he's explained it. I don't know what you gleaned from that, Mia, but
yeah, so I'm just trying to see where again, this memo is trying to distill what people said in a meeting. Let me just see. So I mean, we could make it more general. I don't know if this gets to Matt's issue, but more general to be like, anything that happens in the early action period, the rules should be the same as during the regular clean heat standard that we've already proposed about ownership. I could word it that way. I thought there would be helpful to speak to like why we think that, but maybe it would be more palatable for the group if we just have a statement about equity issues are equity issues. It should be the same throughout. Maybe that's the way to go. I mean, I do think there's a real circumstance happening that sort of begs the question as to why we're coming up with that. But if it's controversial, I'm fine finding consensus language.
I mean, this conversation is also on the record, so there's that if the PUC wanted to refer to it, but also the paragraph. Basically, Matt is suggesting striking the third from the last paragraph. It appears to me, and then the paragraph immediately following it does kind of get at that. It says EAG members acknowledge that retroactively seeking consent to obtain credits from property owners may represent a significant logistical challenge. Nevertheless, it would be inequitable to treat property owners differently during different phases of the Clean Heat Standard implementation. That kind of summarizes it pretty well. That's pretty clear to me. That's something I can get behind, and I think, yeah, all the minutia of detail has been raised in this conversation, so I'm not sure we necessarily need to type it out.
Okay, I could.
Complex.
That sounds good. Why don't I make a minor, I think just like rearranging the second to last paragraph just so it doesn't sort of seem, I think we can just say, what we proposed before applies to this as well. So I'll try to come up with language that I think would be agreeable to everybody, and we'll see if it is for the full group.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you, Ben. Thank you, Pike. I would like to open it up to public comment one last time. In the last 4 minutes that we have. Okay, hearing nothing and seeing nothing. It sounds like we have good next steps. So Mia's going to go ahead and create new language just around the treating the early action period the same as the following period, and you'll circulate that to the subgroup.
Yeah,
right?
I can do that. Yep.
And then I was hearing that we will also still keep on the agenda a report back to the full EAG group, but keep it a little bit short, and that would be on this last piece that we discussed. Is that correct?
With the weatherization assistance program conversation, we were hoping to hear from Jeff Wilcox today on that. I know that Pike had requested hearing from somebody besides myself on that topic. So acknowledging that we took a decent chunk of time in the full EAG meeting last time, I feel like there's still some loose ends there. Again, I'm hesitant I don't want to keep reiterating what I've already said. So I did want to defer to Jeff because he does have, the details on what I was speaking to. So I don't know how we want to approach that, but I think maybe potentially one final subgroup meeting specifically on that to kind of polish up that portion. might be good.
I
And rather
don't
than
think we're, sorry, go on. I didn't interrupt.
oh, that's I was just saying rather than taking time in the full EAG, I recognize that multiple subgroup meetings are also time consuming, but we could also pose it to the EAG. It's like, does anybody, on that specific question, basically, does anybody else want to comment further on it? And I would think that Jeff might want to, but just
Yeah,
throwing
and
it out
I
there. I
was
want
just
to be,
saying,
yeah.
my focus is getting something that the group feels we can stand behind before the PUC, before the deadline. I don't see that happening, given that we have one meeting left. That said, I don't think this group will cease to exist after this memo is done. I mean, we still have to outline our final report, but I do think credit issues are going to be one of them. Obviously, we're having really robust conversations. So I don't think this has to end. I just think, in terms of getting something to the PUC, I'd like to focus on that in the short term. But I think we could absolutely, once this memo is prepared, have more meetings of this subcommittee to keep talking about credit issues, including that. I mean, we're going to have a full report to talk about whatever we think is valuable. So.
Understood.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you all.
Okay, we'll call this to a close then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.